Praise the Lord. According to 1 year Bible reading plan, day 85, we have 2 Samuel chapter 13 to 15. 2 Samuel chapter 13. Now after this, it came about that Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and David's son Amnon liked her. And he liked her a lot that he became ill because of his sister Tamar, and it seemed hard to Amnon to manage. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very wise man. And he said to him, O son of the king, why are you getting thinner day by day? Will you not say what your trouble is? And Amnon said to him, I like Tamar my brother's, Absalom's sister. Then Jonadab said to him, Go to your bed and let it seem that you are ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, Let my sister Tamar come and give me bread and get the food ready before my eyes, so that I may see it and take it from her hand. So Amnon went to bed and made himself seem ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, Please let my sister Tamar come and make me 1 or 2 cakes before my eyes, so that I may take food from her hand. Then David sent to the house where Tamar and said, Go now to your brother's Amnon's house and get a meal for him. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was in bed. And he took paste and made cakes before his eyes, cooking them over the fire. And she took the cooking pot and put the cakes before him, but he would not take them. And Amnon said, Let everyone go away from me. So they all went out. Then Amnon said to Tamar, Take the food and come to the room, and so that I may take it from your hand. So Tamar took the cakes she had made and went with them into her brother Amnon's room. And when she took them to give them to him, then he asked her, Stay here with me, my sister. And answering him, she said, O my brother, it is not right for such a thing to be done in Israel. Do not this evil thing. Now then, go and make your request to the king, for he will not keep me from you. But he would not give attention to what she said. But being stronger than she, he took her by force. Then Amnon was full of hate for her, hating her with a hate greater than his earlier love for her. And he said to her, Get up and be gone. And she said to him, Not so, my brother, for this great wrong is sending me away is worse than what you did to me before. But he gave no attention to her. Then he gave a cry to the servant who was waiting on him, and said, Put this woman out, and let the door be locked after her. Now she had on a long robe such as in past times the king's daughters were dressed in. Then the servant put her out, locking the door after her. And Tamar in her grief put dust on her head, and she put her hand on the head, and went away. And her brother Absalom said to her, Has your brother Amnon been with you? But now let there be an end to your crying, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this thing to heart. So Tamar went on living uncomforted in her brother's house. But when King David had news of all these things, he was very angry. But he did not make trouble for Amnon his son, for he was dear to David, being his oldest son. But Absalom said nothing to his brother Amnon, good or bad, for he was full of hate for him, because he had taken his sister Tamar by force. Now after 2 full years, Absalom had men cutting the wool of his sheep in Baal-hazor, which is near Ephraim. And he sent for all the king's sons to come to his feast. And Absalom came to the king and said, See now, your servant is cutting the wool of his sheep. Will the king and his servants be pleased to come? And the king said to Absalom, No, my son, let us not all go, or the number will be over great for you. And he made his request again, but he would not go, but he gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, If you will not go, then let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said to him, Is there any reason for him to go with you? But Absalom went on requesting him till he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. And Absalom made a great feast, like a feast for a king. Now Absalom had given orders to his servants, saying, Take a note when Amnon's heart is glad with wine, and when I sit to you, make an attack on Amnon, then put him to death without fear. Have I not given you orders? Be strong and without fear." So Absalom's servants did to Amnon as Absalom had given them orders. Then all the king's sons got up, and every man got on his beast and went in flight. Now, while they were on their way, news was given to David that Absalom had put to death all the sons of the king, and that not one of them was still living. Then the king got up in great grief, stretching himself out on the earth, and all his servants were by his side, with their clothing parted. And Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, said, "Let not my lord have the idea that all the sons of the king had been put to death, for only Amnon is dead. This has been purposed by Absalom from the day when he took his sister Tamar by force. So now let not my lord the king take this thing to heart with the idea that all the king's sons are dead, for only Amnon is dead." But Absalom went in flight. And the young man who kept the watch, lifting up his eyes, saw that a great band of people was coming down the slope by the way of the Horons. And the watchman came and gave word to the king, saying, "I saw men coming down by the way of the Horons from the hillside." And Jonadab said to the king, "See, the king's sons are coming. As your servant said, so it is." And while he was talking, the king's sons came, with weeping and loud cries, and the king and all his servants were weeping bitterly. So Absalom went in flight and came to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur, where he was for 3 years. And the king was sorrowing for his son all the time, and the heart of David was wasted with desire for Absalom, for he was comforted for the death of Amnon. 2 Samuel chapter 14. Joab knew that King David missed Absalom very much, so he sent for a clever woman who lived in Tekoa. When she arrived, he said to her, "Pretend that you are in mourning. Put on your mourning clothes and don't comb your hair. Act like a woman who has been mourning for a long time. Then go to the king and say to him what I tell you to say." Then Joab told her what to say. The woman went to the king, bowed down in the ground in respect, and said, "Help me, your majesty." "What do you want?" he asked. "I am a poor widow, sir," she answered. "My husband is dead. Sir, I had 2 sons, and one day they got into a quarrel out in the fields, where there was no one to separate them, and one of them killed the other. And now, sir, all my relatives had turned against me and are demanding that I hand my son over to them, so that they can kill him for murdering his brother. If they do this, I will be left without a son. They will destroy my last hope and leave my husband without a son to keep his name alive." "Go back home," the king answered, "and I will take care of that matter." "Your majesty," she said, "whatever you do, my family and I will take the blame. You and your royal family are innocent." The king replied, "If anyone threatens you, bring him to me, and he will never bother you again." She said, "Your majesty, please pray to the Lord your God so that my relative who is responsible for avenging the death of my son will not commit a greater crime by killing my other son." "I promise by the living Lord," David replied, "that your son will not be harmed in the least." "Please, your majesty, let me say just one more thing," the woman said. "All right," he answered. She said to him, "Why have you done such a wrong to God's people? You have not allowed your own son to return from exile, and so you have condemned yourself by what you have just said. We will all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which can't be gathered again. Even God does not bring the dead back to life, but the king can at least find a way to bring a man back from exile. Now, your majesty, the reason I have come to speak to you is that the people threatened me. And so I said to myself that I would speak to you in the hope that you would do what I ask. I thought you would listen to me and save me from the one who is trying to kill my son and me, and so remove us from the land God gave his people. I said to myself that your promise, sir, would make me safe, because the king is like God's angel and can distinguish good from evil. May the Lord your God be with you." The king answered, "I'm going to ask you a question, and you must tell me the whole truth." "Ask me anything, Your Majesty," she answered. "Did Joab put you up to this?" he asked her. She answered, "I swear by all that is sacred, Your Majesty, that there is no such way to avoid answering your question. It was indeed your officer Joab who told me what to do and what to say. But he didn't in order to straighten out this whole matter. Your Majesty is as wise as the angel of God and knows everything that happens." Later on, the king said to Joab, "I have decided to do what you want. Go and get the young man Absalom and bring him back here." Joab threw himself to the ground in front of David in respect and said, "God bless you, Your Majesty. Now I know that you are pleased with me, because you have granted my request." Then he got up, went to Geshur, and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. The king, however, gave orders that Absalom should not live in the palace. "I didn't want to see him," the king said. So Absalom lived in his own house and did not appear before the king. There was no one in Israel as famous as his good looks as Absalom. He had no defect from his head to toe. His hair was very thick, and he had cut once a year when it grew too long and heavy. It would weigh about 5 pounds according to the royal standard of weights. Absalom had 3 sons and one daughter named Tamar, a very beautiful woman. Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the king. Then he sent for Joab to ask him to go to the king for him, but Joab would not come. Again Absalom sent for him, and again Joab refused to come. So Absalom said to his servants, "Look, Joab's field is next to mine, and it has barley growing in it. Go and set fire to it." So they went and set the field on fire. Joab went to Absalom's home and demanded, "Why did your servant set fire to my field?" Absalom answered, "Because you wouldn't come when I sent you. I wanted to go to the king and ask for me. Why did I leave Geshur and come here? It would be better for me to have stayed there." And Absalom went on, "I want you to arrange for me to see the king, and if I'm guilty, then let him put me to death." So Joab went to King David and told him what Absalom had said. The king sent for Absalom, who went with him and bowed down to the ground in front of him. The king welcomed him with a kiss. 2 Samuel chapter 15. After this, Absalom provided a chariot and horses for himself and an escort of 50 men. He would get up early and go and stand by the road at the city gate. Whenever someone came there with a dispute that he wanted the king to settle, Absalom would call him over and ask him where he was from. And after the man had told him what tribe he was from, Absalom would say, "Look, the law is on your side, but there is no representative of the king to hear your case." And he would add, "How I wish I were a judge. Then anyone who had a dispute or claim could come to me, and I would give him justice." When the man would approach Absalom to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom did this with every Israelite who came to king for judgment, and so he won their loyalty. After 4 years, Absalom said to the king David, "Sir, let me go to Hebron and keep a promise I made to the Lord. While I was living in Geshur in Syria, I promised the Lord that if he would take me back to Jerusalem, I would worship him in Hebron." "Go in peace," the king said. So Absalom went to Hebron, but he sent messengers to all tribes of Israel to say, "When you hear the sound of trumpets, shout, 'Absalom has become king at Hebron.'" Then there were 200 men who at Absalom's invitation had gone from Jerusalem with him. They knew nothing of the plot and went in all good faith. And while he was offering sacrifices, Absalom also sent to the town of Gilo for Ahithophel, who was one of the king's David's advisers. The plot against the king gained strength, and Absalom's followers grew in number. A messenger reported to David, "The Israelites are pledging their loyalty to Absalom." So David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, We must get away at once if we want to escape from Absalom. Hurry, or else he will soon be here and defeat us and kill everyone in the city." "Yes, your majesty," they answered. "We are ready to do whatever you say." So the king left, accompanied by all his family and officials, except for 10 concubines whom he left behind to take care of the palace. As the king and all his men were leaving the city, they stopped at the last house. His officials stood next to him as the royal bodyguards passed by in front of him. The 600 soldiers who had followed him from Gath also passed by, and the king said to Ittai, their leader, "Why are you going with us? Go back and stay with the new king. You are a foreigner, a refugee away from your own country. You have lived here only a short time, so why should I make you wander around with me? I don't even know where I'm going. Go back and take all your people with you, and may the Lord be kind and faithful to you." But Ittai answered, "Your Majesty, I swear to you in the Lord's name that I will always go with you wherever you go, even if it means death." "Fine," David answered, "march on." So Ittai went on with all his men and their dependents. The people cried loudly as David's followers left. The king crossed Kidron Brook, followed by his men, and together they went out toward the wilderness. Zadok the priest, who was there, and with him were the Levites carrying the sacred covenant box. They set it down and didn't pick it up again until all the people had left the city. The priest Abiathar was there too. Then the king said to Zadok, "Take the covenant box to the city if the Lord is pleased with me. Some day he will let me come back to see it and place where it stays. But if he isn't pleased with me, well then, let him do to me what he wishes." And he went on to say to Zadok, "Look, take your son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan and go back to the city in peace. Meanwhile, I will wait at the river crossings in the wilderness until I receive news from you." So Zadok and Abiathar took the covenant box back into Jerusalem and stayed there. David went on up the Mount of Olives crying. He was barefoot and had his head covered with a sign of grief. All who followed him covered their heads and also cried. When David was told that Ahithophel had joined Absalom's rebellion, he prayed, "Please, Lord, turn Ahithophel's advice into nonsense." When David reached the top of the hill, where there was a place of worship, he trusted. Friend Hushai the Archite met with him with his clothes torn and with dirt on his head. David said to him, "You'll be of no help to me if you come with me, but you can help me by returning to the city and telling Absalom that you will now serve him as faithfully as you served his father, and do all you can to oppose any advice that Ahithophel gives. The priests Zadok and Abiathar will be there. Then tell them everything you hear in the king's palace. They have their sons Ahimaaz and Jonathan with them, and you can send them to me with all the information you gather." So Hushai, David's friend, returned to the city just as Absalom was arriving. May the Lord bless us abundantly. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.